Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first session. I am so excited to see a nice full room here to talk about the impacts of transportation on sustainability and how, especially here at Johns Hopkins, what we can do to contribute to more sustainable transportation ideas and advancing not just the science, but also the way that we do it ourselves, right? The practice of it here at Hopkins and in the greater Baltimore and Maryland community, and even maybe someday becoming models for others around the world. So I really want to reserve most of the time today for a conversation in the room. So I'm just going to get right to it and introduce you to Dr. Shima Hamidi, who is a assistant professor of American Health and Environmental Challenges. She works at the School of Public Health and just got, I don't know if she's going to mention this or not, but I'm going to, I hope I don't steal your thunder, a very large grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation to look at climate, transportation, and health. So I think that offers a lot of really exciting opportunities for Hopkins in this space. And so maybe these conversations can also maybe help to shape some of what's going to happen in that grant. So Dr. Hamidi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Latshaw, for your kind introduction. The grant I'm going to speak about, it's my last two slides, but I want to mention that was a partnership with many researchers at Hopkins and other universities, and Dr. Latshaw was a partner on that grant. So I'm very much looking forward to working with you and other than GHU. I am going to touch a little bit, sustainability in a general term, but more specifically, the link between transportation and climate change, how transportation contributes to climate change, and what we can do to really, mitigate some of this rising impacts of climate change. Transportation used to be the second contributors to greenhouse gas emission, the second sector, industrial sectors, after electricity. Now is number one. Since 2020, is the number one contributor to GHG emission. More than 27% of all GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the US, comes from the transportation sector. And globally, more than 72% of that comes from surface transportation, roads, driving, cars, buses. In the US, more than 83%. More than 83% of GHG emission comes from the surface transportation. And if we look at it more closely, there are three major contributors to that. Vehicles, how efficient are the vehicles in terms of burning fossil fuels or being less pollutant? How much we've had advancement in alternative fuels and clean fuels, and how much we drive. The three together make that contribution that I mentioned, making transportation the number one contributor to GHG emissions. So let's look at them one by one. Fuels. We've made lots of advancement. Just look at the past 5 years of how much electric cars, even hydrogen, other sources of clean energies have been becoming popular, exponentially increasing the popularity and use of electric cars. The forecast showing more than 500% increase, and it's just rising. If you look at the vehicles, they are, even those that are using gasoline, are becoming more efficient. They are becoming less pollutant and more environmental friendly. So we are making advancement on those two legs of the pedestal. But how about the third leg? We are going backward. I mean, just if you look at this graph showing how much the amount of driving per capita has increased in the past few decades, exponentially. We just see a little bit of decline in between 2008 to 2010 due to recession, just because people drove less. But overall, just look at this trend. We are just becoming more and more car dependent. We have to drive everywhere. We don't have much of alternatives. Population growth is responsible only for a quarter of the increase in VMT, and it's really hard to envision a solution to the global warming and climate change without really doing anything about this driving. How we can slow down the amount of driving, how we can make other transportation more viable. Well, the first reason we have this trend is because of the way we are shaping our cities and neighborhoods. They are shaped to facilitate driving. Just look at this neighborhood, which is a typical American suburbs on the right. You have no option but to drive in this neighborhood. Any point from A to B, you want to go, you have to drive. Versus the other alternative neighborhood, you have destinations nearby, you can walk, you can bike, you can use public transit, you have a mix of housing and shops and restaurants and supermarkets and bookstores, everything in a walking distance. But this is what more than 90% of our neighborhoods in a typical American city look like. The other solution is public transit. We did a study of public transit in Portland, Oregon, and we observed that we did a before and after an opening of a transit line in Portland, Oregon, and we observed that this opening contributed to more than 6% reduction in GHG emission in the area because people switched to public transit. But also it contributed to additional 8% decrease in GHG emission because even people who didn't want to use public transit walked more and biked more and drove less. Even those who did not want to take public transit. So the overall reduction in GHG emission was more than 14%. That's substantial. That's what public transit can do. But unfortunately, Portland and a few other cities in the US are exceptions. In most American cities, like Dallas, which I did this study, transit is planned in a way that has little overlap with areas that we call transit-dependent areas. People are most likely to use public transit. Just look at those red areas. Those are where people who don't have car, who rely on public transit, live. And just look at the network of light rail in Dallas. Little, minimum overlap. Public transit is not designed to serve low-income and vulnerable population. It's not designed in most American cities to link people to places. So in Dallas, for example, Dallas's experience, we really we did this comprehensive study of quantifying all of this. We worked with the Dallas City Council, with DART, the transit agency, and Dallas City and the mayor to look at everything again. And as a result of that, the city went through a multi-million complete redesign of their transit system. The first phase of that is going to be open in 2024. to prioritize equity, to prioritize low-income and vulnerable population. That's something that could be applicable in many other cities. And these are all, Megan mentioned this center, motivations to really bring all of these under a new team, a new center for climate smart transportation that look at all of these issues through the lens of equity, with the funding by the US Department of Transportation, which was part of the infrastructure bill that was passed in the Congress last year to fund research that contributes to transportation and sustainability, $10 million for 5 years for us to really bring together researchers, public sector, private sector, cities, local governments, state governments, all together in this area with other partner universities, the College, MIT, Morgan State University, UT Austin, and University of Utah, to be able to look at all these three legs of this pedestal together. How we can, accelerate the mass market adoption of electric vehicles and alternative fuels. How we can really look at how we can reduce VMP and GHG emissions from transportation sectors through public transit. How we can use technology, smart cities, and innovative adaptation and mitigation technologies to contribute to climate change mitigation and resiliency. And then all of these through community-centered research, equity, looking all of that through the lens of environmental justice. Our vision is to make climate change and health and equity the center of transportation decision-making at all levels of government. So I really would love to see as much collaboration as we can make, interdisciplinary collaboration, working together, and hopefully in a couple of years I can come back and report some of the projects that we are doing in the center. Thank you.
Great. So now we're just going to go through the what is going on at Hopkins, and then we're going to say at the end sort of like what else should we be doing and how should we be doing it. So your next speaker is myself. So I'll give myself a little introduction. I'm Megan Latshaw. I should have said this up front, and I am on faculty also at the School of Public Health with Dr. Hamidi. And did I do something wrong?
That's what you did. The share screen's that one.
Yeah. And I've been working on transit equity in Baltimore City, and so and I'm going to try to show a little video too. So maybe I can share that slide if I can share that. Oh my God, yes. So a couple of years ago, I came to Hopkins, and I came after having worked for almost 15 years in DC on sort of environmental justice, but at the national scale. And this screen share is not working. This is yeah, that's fine.
Oh, that's what you want.
Yeah. And I was really excited because I always felt sort of like a fake in DC. Like I would talk about environmental justice and talk about like we need to engage communities and what we're doing, and we need them to drive what we're doing. But at the federal level, it's a little bit hard. And so I couldn't wait to come to Hopkins and Baltimore and to sort of engage more with communities. And so during my first year here, I went to an environmental justice, Maryland environmental justice meeting. And I met this guy named Samuel Jordan, who you're about to see in this video. And somebody introduced us and they said, Megan's at Hopkins. And for the next 5 full minutes, Mr. Jordan railed against John Hopkins. Just 5 minutes. And at first I was like, my hackles went up because I was defensive, this is my place. I love Hopkins. But by the end, I thought, you know what? He's right. We could be doing so much more. And we've kind of failed the community when it comes to transit. But I looked at him and so I said, you're right. And he looked at me and he said, I am. And I was like, you said, but I don't have any power to change what we're doing at Hopkins in transportation. I said, the best thing that I can offer is maybe to help you collect some data and maybe show, what you're saying for the policymakers. And so we embarked on, it's kind of a funny story because my first thought was, well, I need to find funding for this. So I didn't have time and I had never really written like a grant. And so I said to my students, does anybody want to work on a grant? And a student volunteered, Sanjana Boyapelli. And I thought, she's never going to get this grant. And she did. And I was like, oh gosh, now I really have to do something. And then I kind of got scared because I thought, I don't know what to do. But I do know how to put together really good teams of people. And so I started reaching out to people that knew how to do what we needed to do and put together this kind of, it was only $20,000, so we didn't even have a lot of money. So what you're gonna see in this video is a description of what we did, and then I'll talk about it in more detail. I can't see the video. You can't see the video. I mean, like up on the screen. Up on the screen. Okay. I see it on the screen. You see it on the screen. Okay. Sorry about this. I really want to show the video. So let's try those. So, a little bit about Mr. Jordan, and this is he. I'll hit share. Thank you, guys. Okay, here we go. Or maybe not. Okay, so I'll just tell you about the report. Okay, so share this. What Mr. Jordan wanted us to do was he wanted us to put together a report that showed 4 different maps. He wanted a map of transit access. So how accessible is transit? Who has access to it? How easily accessible it is? How often the buses come by? And then he also wanted a map of air pollution related to transit. And then he wanted a map of, so these are the transit maps that we did. And you can kind of see in the big one is like the overall transit map. So we combined all the smaller maps into one big one. You can kind of see that white owl and black butterfly that is famous. For those of you who don't know about it, the population in the middle that looks like an L tends to be white and have more wealth. And then this was the social vulnerability map, which looked at things like housing type, access to transportation, language spoken, age, things that might make you more vulnerable to things that could happen with transit or transportation. The third map was air pollution. This is not as good of a map because EPA only has about 3 monitors. So that was what we had to work with. And then the last map was health outcomes that could be related to transit. So heart disease, low birth weight, lung cancer, COPD, asthma, and COVID-19 too. And what we did then is we combined all those 4 maps. So transit access, social vulnerability, air pollution, health, and then we identified the areas with the greatest need. And so our goal was to drive resources to these areas when it comes to transit. It got a lot of attention. Senator Cardin called. We got a message from EPA, from USDOT, and actually in the state legislature last year, there was a bill that passed both the House and the Senate with veto-proof majorities that would require a transit equity analysis like this anytime the Maryland Department of Transportation was going to change a policy to see if there was inequities and how it would impact people. This year, it looks like it's going to pass. Last year, even though it passed both House and Senate, Governor Hogan vetoed it at the last minute, and the legislature was not able to override his veto because they were out of session. So hopefully, Governor Moore has said that he wants to build the red line in Baltimore and has committed to a lot of transit and transportation ideas. So we're hopeful that maybe this year there will be a different outcome. So we've been applying for funding to collect better air pollution data. There is better air pollution data that some people at Hopkins are collecting, so we might be able to incorporate that. We're expanding our analysis to the whole region around the city because a lot of people come in and out of the city to the counties in the area. And this is the team that worked on it that I mentioned before. So that is my work in the area of transportation and health. And now I am going to turn it over to Michelle Duren. Michelle, if you want to try to share your screen, hopefully you'll have a better experience doing that than I did. And Michelle is a PhD candidate in the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And we do see your screen, so that's a good sign, Michelle. And if you want to go ahead and speak, hopefully we'll hear you.
Great. Can you hear me?
We can. Wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So I'll be presenting some high-level findings from research examining the relationship between transportation policies, perceived safety, and bicycling behavior. And the motivation behind this work stems from travel behavior changes that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so available data suggests that overall mobility declined significantly during that time, but bicycling increased. And interestingly enough, as shown on the map, bicycling increased by a greater amount in smaller cities than in large cities that might have a reputation for bicycling. And given those travel behavior changes, I sought to answer 2 questions. And so the first was, considering that during the pandemic, many cities across the country implemented policies to encourage bicycling. I had the question of what effect did those policies have in changing bicycling behavior? And then second, the most widely cited determinant in the literature on bicycling behavior is safety. The perceived lack of safety is often identified as a key barrier for people to cycle. And at the same time, during the pandemic, traffic volumes were reduced and transportation policies changed the environment, such as by creating more separation between cyclists and motor vehicles in some instances. So a related question then became, what role did changes in perceived safety have, both in relation to transportation policies, but also in relation to bicycling behavior changes? And those are questions that were more directly assessed through these 3 research aims. And so the first focused on developing a better understanding of the concept of perceived bicycling safety by identifying its components. The second considered an array of commonly cited determinants in the literature for bicycling behavior and assessed which are key predictors of who increased bicycling during the pandemic. And the last aim evaluated the relationships between these concepts of interest. So policy, perceived safety, and bicycling. And it more specifically tested the hypothesis that some of the effect of transportation policies on bicycling behavior was mediated by perceived safety. And with the first aim here, I used principal component analysis to consider that question of what factors influence this concept of perceived bicycling safety. And with this, I identified 11 factors that were commonly discussed in the literature as connecting bicycling to safety and adverse health effects more generally. And I have these listed out on the slide. And then thinking of the findings here, so from those 11 factors, the principal component analysis identified 5 components that can contain the information from those original set of 11 factors. And these can be summarized as contaminant exposure, which encompasses noise and air pollution, as well as exposure to UV radiation and infection risk. The injurious collision risk component considers both the risk of being involved in a crash as well as the risk of sustaining injuries while bicycling. The street conditions component encompasses poor surfaces and poor lighting on streets. The weather conditions component encompasses both exposure to extreme temperatures and exposure to precipitation events. And then lastly, the crime risk component is one that's just centered on a single factor. And turning to the second aim, so this used lasso regression modeling to identify key predictors of increased cycling during the pandemic and from a set of more than 50 variables that encompass individual factors such as age and income, as well as social and physical environmental factors, such as the salience of bicycling in one's community or having access to micro-mobility options. And turning to the results here, so in the interest of time, I'm just going to speak to the policy and safety related variables. And so from the larger subset of variables, I found that individuals perceiving bicycling became safer during the pandemic, had an increased odds of bicycling more. And in terms of policies, 2 policies were identified as key predictors and having a positive influence on bicycling. These are establishing new bike lanes and then also restricting certain residential streets to local traffic only. Oops. And then lastly, the third aim used logistic regression models to differentiate between the direct effect of transportation policies on bicycling and then also the indirect effect that traveled through changes in perceived safety. 4 policies were considered for this aim, which included creating extra street space for bicycling, establishing new bike lanes, reducing speed limits, and then limiting certain residential streets to local traffic. And the results suggest that perceived safety is, in fact, a significant mediator between the implementation of transportation policies and changes in bicycling behavior. And the visual that I have on this slide depicts each of the outputs of the mediation analysis, but focusing in on the proportion mediated section of the figure, the proportion of each policy's effect that was found to be mediated by perceived safety ranged from 10 to 14%. And I'll end with a slide just touching on the implications of these research findings. And so first, the findings of all 3 aims offer evidence that policies can impact bicycling behavior. The degree to which transportation policies affect behavior may depend on the extent to which those policies make community members feel safer while bicycling, as found with that last aim that I was speaking to with respect to those 4 policies commonly implemented during the pandemic. The first aim found perceived safety is a complex concept and one that's not limited only to one's risk of being involved in a crash. And in terms of policy recommendations, these findings suggest investing in cycling infrastructure, such as with protected bike lanes, as well as implementing measures that filter traffic and reduce speeds, can encourage people to cycle more. And if realized, that has the potential to improve public health by reducing the chronic disease burden, as well as benefit the environment by reducing carbon emissions. And I guess I'll end it there and try to leave a fair bit of time at the end for questions.
Great, thank you so much. And then certainly not least, last but not least, we're going to hear from Nelson Greenlee, who is the transportation manager in the Johns Hopkins Transportation Services. So I am going to turn it over.
Well, thank you, Megan, and thank you for having us today and putting this together for the host.
Oh, sorry. I don't know why it keeps on sharing.
Suddenly low tech back up. Which I will recycle afterwards. Thank you. As Megan said, my name is Nelson Greenlee. I'm the transportation manager here at the Homewood campus in the Transportation Services Department. I just wanted to share a brief update with everybody about some of the initiatives we're working on to do our part for sustainability. Really quickly, I would like to just start with our mission, depending on how familiar you are with who we are and what we do. Our goal is to provide safe, reliable, and efficient transportation. That's what we like to do. That's what we want to do. That's what our aim is every single day. The cool thing about what we do in transportation services and the part of our mission that is efficiency is that it encompasses both cost logistical operations as well as sustainability. We contribute a significant impact to sustainability goals primarily through shared ride, the provision of, the application of, that's removing single vehicle trips from the road, as well as our goal is to be leading the charge towards alternative fuel EV vehicles. So that's really some of the areas that we're working on right now that we're excited about. And to that end, I guess I'd like to just share some of those with you. We'll start with the grant program that we rolled out in 2021. It was to, yeah. Awesome, thanks guys. So the grant program rolled out in 2021. The purpose of it was to encourage uptake of electric or hybrid vehicles on campus. This wasn't a personal grant program, it was for the departments on campus. Offered $5,000 a vehicle for an electric purchase and $4,000 for a hybrid purchase. We did have some departments take advantage of that and acquire new vehicles. That is a program that we were excited about and excited to offer. There we go. I mentioned earlier that two of the areas that I think that our department can make some of the most significant contributions are in shared ride and leading the transition to alternative fuels. What better way than to combine both of those into one by electrifying our fleet? Many of you probably already know that the Homewood Peabody Dade My route that we operate is our largest by volume. Those are the JHU wrap transit buses you see out on the road there. In the last month alone, we provided over 50,000 trips, and that comprised almost 100,000 passenger miles traveled. Otherwise, now I'm just talking Hamidi to use vehicle miles traveled, but anyway, that was 100,000 passenger miles traveled, not in single occupancy vehicle trips. So that's just fantastic on our part. Prior to the pandemic, we did almost 1 million trips on that route. Obviously, the pandemic had a dampening effect on ridership. However, we have recovered to about 75% of that as of this year. So we are just continuing to grow, and I think we'll be fully recovered by next year. That fleet is currently, to this day, comprised of 10 diesel buses, but the high utilization of the route, along with advancements in EV bus technology, really made this a natural area for us to begin the investment in electrification of the fleet. The university is committed to doing that and getting it done starting in 2024 with a full conversion by 2026. That means it's gonna take place in 2 phases. We'll get the first buses in by the end of 2024. That will allow us as a department some time to get experienced with operating the equipment, understand how it operates in our use case scenario before we go on to the next batch in 2025, 2026. Another factor there that I'm kind of excited about is with the pace of technological innovation right now, I anticipate that the vehicles that we're looking at for the second batch will have more to offer, more capability, even than what we're looking at right now, even though it's only 2 years away. So it's an exciting thing about doing it in 2 batches. Excuse me. So right now, what we're doing is we're working with vendors, and Bob McLean mentioned this in the room just a moment ago. We are working with vendors to acquire that first batch. We're talking financing right now and getting the charging infrastructure set up. One of the considerations that we did have in our selection of vehicles was that we wanted a proven product. There's been a proliferation of manufacturers, some with products on the road, some not so much. All a great story to tell. It was important to us that we found a product that actually has real world experience being used. That and one other beneficial thing about this conversion, our current vendor that operates the route has experience running electric vehicles in several different markets, several different models. Although the markets are different, many of them have a use case profile similar to ours here in Baltimore. Other couple things that we're doing, we're piloting a couple of fixed routes here at campus to help increase mobility, get folks connected. These routes are partially a result of the commuter survey that got sent out earlier this year. We're pretty excited about it. The first one is our Keswick Penn commuter route, connects the campus at Mason Hall and the Keswick administrative buildings with Penn Station 7 times a day, time at the MARC train schedule. And the second one is our Hamden fixed route, the Hamden circulator, excuse me. That one is just a circulator that runs around the Hamden neighborhood. We got a lot of feedback from the student body about that one. It runs continuously 7 to 11 on Mondays. Preliminary ridership is looking positive, particularly for that one. And for both of them, we're hoping that we can solve the reduced congestion in and around the campus. And for the Keswick route, maybe help alleviate the last mile issue that folks coming in from afar have. So finally, we're still plugging away at EV chargers here on campus. Our current goal, thank you for the courtesy laugh. Our current goal is to add 12 this year. That would double our existing inventory of 11. We're going to be putting those in the San Martin and the South garages. They'll be level 2. They won't be fancy, but they will be free to use. And that project is being overseen by our new dedicated parking and transportation demand management manager, Jared Kruba, who was brought on just this last year to specifically work on this portfolio. So quick recap, working diligently and quickly on vehicle acquisition for the first phase of our bus fleet electrification. We're working on getting those level 2 chargers acquired and installed in the garages, and we are going to continue operating and collecting data and analysis from our new pilot fixed routes. Thank you very much for your time today.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
All right, so now I want to open it up to the room for comments, questions, challenges. Yes. In the mask first.
Yes, a question for you and also one to Michelle. Your name, right? Okay,
Yes.
bike lanes. So, I live over in Wyman Park and I take the nice bike lane on the University Parkway. And it's very nice, but I was, going down the hill toward 39th Street, west of campus, and would have been killed if I'd been 3 seconds later. There was a car turned, and because the cars are parked in between, traffic doesn't see the cyclist. And I asked my city councilwoman about this. Can we label one of those white posts or something? Beware of cyclists. And of course, you know, cars have a right of way, seems a right of way, so that have to label for the cyclists, beware of turning cars. Pedestrians also just walk through there.
Yeah.
So it's supposedly safer, but it's not necessarily. And it's exactly the place, the garage to Broadview, where somebody was killed a few years ago. There was a bicycle memorializing him. Anyway, second question to Michelle. Baltimore City people pay high taxes compared to people in the county. And the suggestion would be, if we want to discourage people commuting, put a toll booth on I-83. Let's get serious about, you know, people live in the county and they pay fewer taxes, but they work in the city. So we need some creative thing to discourage economically that.
My mom, she worked in Philly. She had to pay a city wage tax for exactly what you're saying every year. Do you guys want to come sit up here? And Michelle, did you want to address that? I think that was directed to you.
Sure. I mean, yeah, there's definitely, I guess, speaking to your first comment, there's a lot of different designs for bike lanes, which, you know, have varying levels of safety associated with them. So it's, you know, a recognized problem, I think, to, you know, consider where parked cars are and also where there might be right turns for vehicles at intersections. So it's, yeah, definitely a concern and a point well taken. And yeah, thinking about kind of how to encourage modal shift, there's kind of making bicycling more convenient and safer and kind of promoting the benefits, but then there's also the cost piece, which I think you kind of well articulated, this idea of, you know, also trying to make other modes maybe less desirable than biking. So there's, yeah, definitely two policy approaches you can take to promoting modal shift.
This is sort of leveraging off what we just said, but also expanding on it. I live in this area too. I'm a heavy duty cyclist. I've been cycling this most of my life. One of the things I see coming from the community, if I'm active on Nextdoor, is there is a lot of pushback by motorists, some of them who happen to be cyclists, who saying you're destroying our ability to get around the city. And I suspect that the incident that was being talked about is, oh, I have the right to go wherever I want to, however I want to. Excuse my friends, screw the cyclists. There's a lot of that pushback. Yes, it's a small minority, but it's still vocal. It goes to other people. How can Hopkins as an institution, because of the leverage we have as an institution, basically, you know, upgrade it so we say, hey, we've got to work together on this. How do we do it? And this is a we situation. It's not a them and us. It's a we situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Good point. So, yeah.
Hey, Dr. Hamidi. I enjoyed your presentation. I wanted to know what your thoughts on were how much progress is going to be made over the next decade for long-term travel. I know you showed the EV increasing. Do you think that large-scale travel from maybe East Coast to Midwest on public transport is going to increase, or is it going to be more local, city, county?
You mean public?
Yeah, public transport, train.
Right.
in the infrastructure bill, maybe?
I think not in the short term, but in the longer term, before coming here, I was in Kansas, over the University of Kansas, and one of the hot topics there was, high-speed rail. The high-speed rail that, was 100% funded by the private sector. I think it was a company in Japan that's running high-speed rail there, partnering with some of the investors here in Texas to make this happen between Dallas and Houston. And that high-speed rail make a 3.5 hour drive, make it 45 minutes. Totally changing the definition of commuting. You literally can live in Dallas and go and work in Houston and come back again in the evening. And I think that's gonna be happening in many other areas. I know a couple of other high-speed rail projects in California. I think East Coast is gonna speed one. And yes, I think within not really, from East Coast to West Coast, but within the range of 3 to 5 hours drive, we are going to see the changes in commuting, changes in travel patterns, and changes in people's perception of public transportation, particularly in public sectors. I think public sector is interested, and I think this is something that physically and economically makes sense to. So yeah, that's pretty exciting. One thing if I just very quickly mention about voice study, I'm working actually on a project that looks at how and to what extent we can narrow travel lanes. Because travel lanes in most American cities are too wide. Right. Just look at, how wide are streets. Narrow them to make some room for wide lanes and wider sidewalks. And we interviewed several Department of Transportation in different states, and many of them have pointed us to great examples of doing that and doing before and after studies, observing increase in safety, more cycling, more walking, beneficial for both drivers and bicyclists. So I think more kind of like this type of research, promoting that, kind of like educational, campaigns that could let everyone know really what's the benefit to everyone could also help.
So I saw lots of hands, which I really wanted to have like a good long conversation, but we end in 1 minute and I am in the next one of the next sessions too. So I have to go to that. But what I will say is hopefully, throughout the day, especially at lunch, we can have these conversations, and then there's going to be a survey that'll ask you about the day. So if you want to put your feedback in there, things that you didn't get to have heard. Dee, I saw you kind of like, you just really wanted to say something.
I just want to say that right now Baltimore City is doing their sustainability action plan for the next 10 years, and they had a big session on transportation. And there's an in-person session at Silver on April 22nd. So if you go to their website, you can sign up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that's an important partner too in this whole process. So thank you all for being here. I'm sorry we couldn't talk more, but I hope the rest of the day will have a